Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the articles that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 7 important articles for a detailed analysis. We have 4 columns that are very important for the mains examination and few articles that are important for the prelims exam. So let's cover these topics one by one and let's ensure that the discussion is as comprehensive as possible so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are benefiting from the initiative, do press the like button and do let us know in the comment section below. Now before we start, don't forget our Conquer Prelims crash course has started on our YouTube channel and as well as on the Unacademy app. Phase 1 of the crash course started on 19th April, where we are covering the most important static topics on the Unacademy app every day at 6 p.m. through these live classes. So today, as part of the static phase of the crash course, Abhishek sir will be taking up the next session for history at 6 p.m. live on the Unacademy app. And as part of the second phase of the crash course, where we are covering the important current affairs of the last 18 months to help you revise the current affairs, today we are going to take up the third session for international relations. I'm going to take up the session at 7:30 p.m. live on our YouTube channel. And the best way to access both the classes is to join our Telegram channel. Just scan the QR code or search for Unacademy IAS English, and we are going to share the links of both the classes right before it goes live. And there's another important announcement. I'm sure many of you know that Unacademy had provided a massive discount on the IAS courses to ensure that our courses are affordable to all the students. But yesterday was the last date. The offer was supposed to end yesterday. The price was dropped to just 25,000 and yesterday midnight, the offer was supposed to end. But over the last day, we have received a lot of requests from students urging that the offer be extended as they wish to enroll for the program. So the management at Unacademy has agreed to honor the request, and I'm very glad to announce that the offer will be extended for a few more days until the 11th of May. After 11th of May, the prices would go back to around 60,000 plus. So until then, you will still access all the IAS courses just for around 25,000 rupees. We have our new English batch which has started from yesterday. So do enroll for the program and avail this offer if you wish to. Now let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an important column from page number 6. This article is very interesting. The writers are essentially talking about a topic known as living will. The topic deals with the issue of death and how one chooses to die in case one is suffering from terminally ill diseases or conditions. See, it is often said that death is inevitable. Now, don't think I'm being very negative here. Death should be a normal topic which should be easily discussed. Because as they say, in the long run, we are all dead. That is inevitable. Only one thing is certain in life, which is death, which arrives for everyone. But sociologists and analysts have noted that in India, in the current Indian society, there is a reluctance to accept death. That's largely because as families have become more nuclear, more smaller in size, you don't come across too many deaths in the immediate circle. And eventually when death arrives in the family or let's say to oneself, eventually we are overwhelmed by the feeling and we don't like to talk about the topic, or we don't discuss the aspects or the issues regarding death. So when it comes to those who are suffering from terminally ill conditions, who have absolutely no hope to make a recovery despite the best possible medical care, it's about how will you allow the patient to pass away. So there have been many studies, many surveys conducted regarding this sensitive topic, and the writers are exploring this issue in a very beautiful, sensitive way, which not only gives us some insight into the topic of living will with regard to end-of-life care, and they approach this not just from a legal perspective, but they're also looking at the ethical perspective. So the topic becomes very important for GS paper 2 and as well as for GS paper 4. Or maybe they could even be an essay topic on this. So let's explore this topic in slight detail. The writers are stating that most Indian families, they appear to be unprepared to accept the eventuality. When the time eventually comes, as I said, death is inevitable, it is the only certainty in life, and yet we are not prepared to accept death, to welcome death. So the concern here is about how the terminally ill patients are often treated in, let's say, countries like India. The writers are drawing a comparison with the systems established in Western countries, and they draw parallels with Indian hospitals and how terminally ill patients are treated and what choices are available to the patient and the family members. Because obviously, the death of a loved one is a very harrowing experience, a traumatic experience for the entire family as well. But more importantly, it's about the person who is passing away. So the question here is, should the person have a choice regarding end-of-life care? When death is almost certain, when you're terminally ill and every possible medical option has been exhausted, there is no hope for any kind of recovery. Is there a point in delaying death by few days, by few hours, by few weeks, which only increases the suffering for that patient? Many surveys have been conducted regarding this, which the writers are also referring to. They've asked many people, how would you wish to die? Will you wish to die peacefully at your home where you're surrounded by your loved ones? Or would you wish to die in hospital ICUs where you're hooked up to machines and ventilator devices, where your life is being held up for few days or few hours, which only increases the suffering and eventually you die alone in the ICU of a hospital? Given these two choices, majority of the people opted for passing away peacefully at home, surrounded by their loved ones. When all other options are exhausted, what is the point of delaying death? When death has already arrived, it is an eventuality, it's a matter of time. What's the point in delaying it by few hours or few days, which only increases the suffering, the trauma, not just for the patient, but for the entire family as well? So the writers are exploring this topic regarding end-of-life care in India. What are the legal provisions surrounding it? Why patients should be provided a more simplified process of exercising their living will, where they can provide advanced medical directives to their immediate family members, right? So that life support can be withdrawn or withheld at the right time, so that the patient can be allowed to pass away peacefully, preferably within their home, surrounded by their loved ones, not alone in an ICU where they are hooked up to machines and simply the suffering continues. So this is where you should also understand a concept known as palliative care. What do you mean by palliative care? What is its role in easing the process of death, and what are the provisions with regard to end-of-life care in India? How does it compare with rest of the world? So that is what we need to understand. Now, if you look at the Western countries, studies have shown that in the European region, for example, just 10% of terminally ill patients passed away in hospital ICUs. So what does it tell you? It tells you that almost 90% of terminally ill patients in Europe, they died in their home, on their own bed, surrounded by their family members. That's because in Western countries, including in the US, there are better provisions available when it comes to advanced medical directives, or what we call as a living will. I'm sure all of you would have heard about writing a will, which is a legal document, right? A natural will refers to your property, your assets, how will you distribute them after you pass away. But a living will is very different. Living will is about your end-of-life care, whether you wish to be kept on life support or not. And you are basically authorizing an immediate family member to exercise that decision, to give that consent, to refuse treatment, to withhold life support at the last stage, so that the person can be allowed to pass away peacefully. So that is a living will, which is a recognized legal document. So in Western countries, there are much better provisions. The hospital systems are better equipped to deal with this. There is greater awareness about death and how end-of-life care has to be handled. In fact, this is even called death literacy, which is lacking in India. Being aware of these consequences, being aware of how to deal with those circumstances is something that will prepare every individual and every family. In India, even the hospitals and doctors are not well prepared and equipped to handle such situations. So this is where a stark difference lies between the systems in India and the systems in Western countries. So surveys and studies, they show that majority of terminally ill patients in European hospitals, or let's say in the United States, in Canada, in Australia as well, they exercise the living will, or advanced medical directives are provided, through which these patients who are almost at the brink of death, right, when every other medical option has been exhausted, no other treatment is available, just to ease the suffering, to ensure they pass away peacefully, they will deny or withhold the end-of-life support. They will deny being placed in an ICU, which will only extend the life by maybe few hours or few days. The patients are transferred to their homes. They go onto their own bed, and surrounded by their loved ones, they pass away peacefully. So surveys have shown it's only 10% of the patients who have passed away in hospital ICUs in Europe. Now you might ask, what's that number in India? Right? Let's compare. In India, the number is a staggering 70%. 70% of the terminally ill patients in India have died in hospital ICUs, hooked to life support systems. Right? You're hooked on to various machines. Every vital body function is being measured constantly. You are put on ventilators. Essentially, your life is being artificially supported. This will only extend your life by maximum few hours or few days, not more than that. You are basically in an irrecoverable stage. Now, many people get confused with the topic of a living will with euthanasia. Please don't get confused between the two. Both are entirely different. Euthanasia is different. Exercising a living will, giving an advanced medical directive, is entirely different. In case of euthanasia, right, you are exercising the right to take your own life, which is legally allowed in some countries. But in case of euthanasia, it's not a condition that you should be suffering from a terminally ill illness, or let's say some kind of disease or something which makes you terminally sick, right? There are countries which allow you to exercise your right to euthanasia even without any kind of terminal illness. So that involves an act of killing. That's why it's called mercy killing. That's not what happens when you exercise a living will. When you're exercising a living will, you're already about to die. The patient is not being killed. There's no mercy killing involved here. Simply the life support is being withdrawn, or it's being withheld, so that instead of artificially delaying the life and suffering for few hours and days, the person is allowed to pass away peacefully. So there is a world of difference between exercising a living will and exercising the right to euthanasia. Of course, in India, euthanasia is illegal. It's banned. There are no legal provisions governing euthanasia. But there are some jurisdictions, some countries which allow euthanasia, but that is mercy killing, where life is taken away on certain grounds. But in case of exercising a living will, it's entirely different. You're simply exercising your right to deny or withhold the treatment in the last stage when there is no other option left. Right? It's a way to peacefully pass away, which reduces the suffering for the patient and the suffering for the entire family as well. So the numbers from India and Western countries clearly speak for themselves. Right? It clearly highlights the stark divide that exists. Now, if you look at the rest of the 30% of the patients in India, don't assume that they are exercising the right to living will. Right? I told you 70% of terminally ill patients in India are dying in hospital ICUs. So don't assume that other 30% are getting an easier way out. The other 30% are getting discharged against medical advice. This is a problem in our legal system and in the hospital framework, the legal framework governing medical care in India. Let's say you're terminally ill and the doctor has finally given a final date or a final verdict that nothing else can be done. It's only a matter of time. In such cases, let's say the patient or the family, let's say they deny treatment. They say, we don't want to continue treatment. We want to take the patient home. When you exercise this option in a hospital, the doctors will discharge the patient, but they will say that this is a case of lama or dama, left against medical advice, discharged against medical advice. So it means that the hospital was against the discharge. Medical professionals, the doctors were against the discharge, but still the family insisted, the patient insisted, and they've taken discharge from the hospital. Now the problem with this is that it limits the option for palliative care, right? Since patients have no other option, there is no legal provision regarding streamlining living will, there is no death literacy in India. Patients are forced sometimes to exercise this option, where hospitals discharge the patients by signing off the case as lama or dama. Now the problem is they can't take palliative care. What is palliative care? Palliative care eases suffering when a person is about to pass away. Palliative care provides essential support in the last stage just to take away the pain, the suffering. Let's say there is a terminally ill cancer patient. If there is a critical failure which is happening, and if death has become inevitable at the last stage, palliative care will be provided to terminally ill patients so that at least the suffering in those last few days, maybe last 2 weeks or 3 weeks, that suffering can be eased, it can be reduced, any kind of pain can be reduced so that the person passes away easily. In Western countries, this is what is provided. Let's say the case is beyond retrieve. Patients are given the option, right, to go home and be with their loved ones, but at least till they pass away, palliative care is provided by healthcare professionals. But in the case of India, this becomes difficult as they get discharged stating that the discharge was against medical advice. So this creates complications for shifting to palliative care. A study has shown that 83% of the people in India would prefer to die peacefully at their home, surrounded by their loved ones. So this is where the legal system and the frameworks that we have need to be improved. For example, if you look at the guidelines of ICMR, the Indian Council of Medical Research, it talks about the duty of care of medical professionals, right? The healthcare professionals, doctors, nurses, everyone, they have a sacred duty to care for the patients. Now, this care is not just limited to treatment. It's also about mitigating suffering, all kinds of suffering, which includes the suffering that comes by being hooked onto ICUs against your will. Let's say it is a terminally ill case, there are no other options available for treatment and death is just hours or days away, right? There's no point in extending that suffering, keeping one away from the family and allowing them to die alone in a hospital ICU, that too hooked onto machines, right? So that is where this guideline itself goes against the very ethics of medical science and humane treatment, which should aim to reduce suffering for patients. The problem in India is that putting patients, terminally ill patients, into the ICU has become a matter of routine. Studies have shown that a large number of patients, right, they are pushed into ICUs at the last stage, and this has become a routine practice. Yes, ICU facilities are needed, but if it's a terminally ill case and if there is no other option available, there should be the option to exercise living will and provide those advanced medical directives. So writers are saying that the lack of death literacy, not just amongst patients, but even amongst hospitals and doctors, is because there is no awareness about how to handle the situation. There is no awareness about the option of living will. In India as well, you can exercise the right to living will. The option is there, but there is no legal framework. It has not been streamlined through a legal framework. So there is no specific law that provides for legal clarity. So this is one of the shortcomings in our legal system. However, the Supreme Court of India recently has passed few judgments regarding advanced medical directives. In 2023, the Supreme Court passed a very important verdict and stated that any advanced medical directive left behind by a terminally ill patient has to be executed, allowing for the patients and their family members who are authorized by the patient to withhold life support and withdraw life support at the last stage, which can allow them to pass away in a peaceful manner. So the option exists in India as the Supreme Court has upheld the right to living will. The Supreme Court said that right to pass away peacefully and the right to palliative care is integral to right to health. It is seen as part of right to health. But people are not aware about this, and again, hospitals are not equipped, they're not prepared. Doctors also lack awareness sometimes. That is why most patients are pushed into ICUs many times against the wish of the family and the patients. It only increases the hospital bills, puts the family into a lot of suffering and trauma, and more importantly, family is separated from the patient, right? So it's a very delicate, sensitive subject that the article is dealing with. And please understand, it is very different from passive euthanasia. It is not a case of euthanasia. In euthanasia, there is an act of killing. It's a mercy killing, right? And being terminally ill may not be a precondition in case of euthanasia. But in case of exercising living will and exercising your advanced medical directives, which you would have exercised when you're in a healthy state of mind, this is essentially about passing away peacefully, allowing natural death to occur, and there is no act of killing involved. So euthanasia, even passive euthanasia, is very different from the right to exercise your living will. Now coming to the last point, how does one exercise a living will, or how does one give an advanced medical directive? You essentially have to bring out a document, a legal document. You need to nominate an immediate family member who will act on your behalf, because maybe you will not be in a sound state of mind, or maybe you are in a vegetative state, maybe you are pushed into a coma, right, where you're not able to provide your consent. So you nominate an immediate family member who will be authorized to give consent on your behalf. But if the patient is aware, is conscious, then the patient themselves can exercise this. But in case of vegetative state, in case of complete incapacity of the patient, the nominated immediate family member will be authorized to give consent for refusing further treatment, for withholding life support at the end stage. So this document has to be attested by two witnesses. Two witnesses have to attest the document, and it should be attested by a notary or by a gazetted officer. So this is how a legal will, essentially a living will, right, is prepared, which provides advanced medical directives regarding what will happen when you reach a terminally ill stage, whether you wish to be put on life support or not. So spreading awareness about this is very essential. People should know that such an option exists. The hospital should be well equipped to allow the patients to exercise the option and shift towards palliative care. Once life support systems are withheld, right, at least palliative care can be provided then. In the comfort of one's home, or maybe in the case of regular hospitalization as well, palliative care can be provided to ease the suffering so the patient can pass away peacefully. So this is the important topic that the column dealt with. You can expect questions in your ethics paper, maybe in GS paper 2 as well, or maybe an entire essay topic on this. Right? So please be aware of this issue. It's very important to spread death literacy as well. Right? It's very important to be aware of the issues. It's not something that should be stigmatized. It's not something very negative or something you shouldn't talk about. Right? This is something which should be streamlined. It should be mainstreamed, because as I said, death is inevitable. Right? In the long run, we are all dead. Now let's look at the next article. There's an editorial on page number 6 that talks about the Global Plastics Treaty. Now, I'll not go into the entire details of the topic, because recently we have covered the topic in 2 classes. We have already discussed this twice in the last few weeks, but there is a need to summarize what has developed during the latest summit regarding the proposed Global Plastics Treaty. So the world took a commitment in 2022 under the UN Environment Programme to come out with a global treaty that can eliminate plastics. In 2022, the global community pledged, they took a call that we are going to come out with a global plastics treaty that will lead to the elimination of plastics. As you know, plastic pollution is extremely detrimental for the environment, and it also contributes significantly for greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. So to curb plastic pollution, the global community took a call under the leadership of UN Environment Programme that by 2024, within 2 years, we will finalize a treaty, a global treaty that will provide a deadline, that will set a target, and it will define the elimination of plastic from the world. So 2 years' time was given, and to negotiate the treaty, an intergovernmental negotiating committee was established, INC, Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee. The task of the INC was to meet regularly and work out a final global plastics treaty by the end of 2024. So just a few days ago, the latest summit of INC was held in Ottawa, in Canada. But unfortunately, this summit has not given any concrete results. Countries have developed issues over the negotiating points, and due to the differences between various countries, there has been no final treaty. The next summit is going to be held in Busan in South Korea in November 2024. So that will be the last opportunity to work out a global plastics treaty by 2024 as committed by the countries in 2022. Right? This was a commitment. The commitment was that by end of 2024, we will have a global plastics treaty. Everyone was hoping that it will be achieved at Ottawa itself, but it hasn't happened. So we need to understand why. What are those differences and what can be done to ensure that we have a final treaty, at least in South Korea, by the end of 2024. See, one major sticking point has been the alternatives. What are the alternatives for plastic? Because plastic is omnipresent in almost every single industry in our day-to-day life. Plastic plays a pivotal role. And I hope you know that plastic is primarily a petrochemical product. So the oil-producing nations and those countries with significant petroleum refining capacities, they are a little hesitant about committing to strict deadlines and binding targets. Plus, there is a question about alternatives being available to plastics, whether it is affordable, accessible, what would be the impact on this economic transition, which every country will have to make. So it's primarily on these grounds that countries have developed difference of opinion. So major oil producing and exporting nations like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and even United States and Russia, and countries with significant petroleum refining capacities like India, they've all expressed concern about a binding target and a deadline. So this is something which held up the negotiations. India, US, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. These countries, which are oil-producing nations or petroleum refining nations, right, they have concerns about a deadline, a strict, legally binding deadline. This is one reason why the negotiations got held up and there was no final treaty at Ottawa. The other concern is about alternatives. What are the other cleaner alternatives available? See, India itself has amended the plastic waste management rules in 2021, and we have banned around 19 types of single-use plastic. India has already taken few measures to ban single-use plastics, right? This was included in the plastic waste management rules that was amended in 2021. But however, problem is in enforcement. At the state level, There is a lack of enforcement. As we know, single-use plastics continue to be used. They continue to be produced. Plus, there is no adequate recycling. See, this is what the Global Plastics Treaty was hoping to achieve. It was hoping to set a deadline with a set of binding targets so that we can curb the production of plastic, limit the usage of plastic as well, and promote recycling. This was essentially the agenda that was laid out in front of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee. But due to the differences that have come up between these countries, there has been no progress. On the other hand, the European countries and even African countries, they are pretty clear that the deadline should be somewhere around 2040. They are already accepting a deadline, a binding target as well, that somewhere around 2040 we should keep a final target by which we should eliminate plastics, not just single-use plastics, but all kinds of plastics. So African countries and European countries are largely on board. But India, US, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and few others, they are hesitant to accept these targets. Now, India has made a very interesting proposal during the negotiations. India has said that let there be a common goal to eliminate plastic, but the targets and the responsibilities should be differentiated. This has been India's argument. India has stated that there might be a few countries, small countries, poor countries, developing, underdeveloped nations, which may not be contributing significantly to plastic pollution, or they are not in a position to afford the alternatives, which currently are very expensive. Right now, the alternative materials to plastic, right, they are quite expensive, they are cost prohibitive, so it makes them inaccessible, unaffordable, right? So India's argument is that let there be a common goal, let there be a broad deadline, but the responsibilities and the specific targets should vary from country to country. Essentially, India has tried to introduce the CBDR concept, which India had promoted at the Climate Change Convention. In the Climate Change Convention as well, right, it was India and few other developing nations which introduced the concept of CBDR, common but differentiated responsibilities. The argument there was developed nations are more responsible for greenhouse gas emissions, so they should take up the greater responsibilities, and they should also assist the poor countries and developing nations by providing finance and technology so that they can make a cleaner transition. So at Climate Change Convention, India and other developing nations had always argued that yes, fighting climate change is a global target, it's a common goal, but the responsibilities have to be differentiated based on historical responsibilities and based on one's capacities as well. So the same principle is being promoted by India at the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee as well, right? So India is trying to bring the principle of parity, the principle of equity, so that countries which are not contributing significantly to plastic pollution, countries which don't have the capacity, countries which can't afford the alternatives, they should get a relaxed deadline with non-binding targets, but others who are significantly contributing to plastic pollution and who have the technology, who have the resources, they should accept more strict targets and binding deadlines, and that is what India has been pushing for. So the editorial largely agrees with India's support, India's position. It supports the stand taken by the Indian government, and the editorial is asking the global community to first focus on alternatives. Ensure that these alternative materials which can replace plastic become cheaper, become accessible and affordable for all the countries. Because this is going to be one of the biggest transitions that we have made. It's as big as transitioning away from fossil fuels and moving towards electric vehicles, right? The transition away from plastics is going to be on the same scale. It will have a huge environmental impact. It will have a negative economic impact as well if it is not well handled. If the transition is not well handled, it could hurt the economies of several nations, right? So India's position to bring in the CBDR principle and focus on alternatives before setting deadlines and targets is a very reasonable position. And the editorial praises the Modi government for taking the balanced stand. But, however, we should keep in mind that if we fail to achieve the treaty by 2024, then the global initiative might lose the focus, it might get distracted. As of now, there is some urgency because the countries have committed that by 2024 that there will be a treaty. So hopefully by the end of this year, when the next summit will happen in South Korea, we should hopefully have a global plastics treaty, right? It can have a set of differentiated targets for different countries. It can also push developed nations like European countries, US and others to provide finance and capacity building and technology to the smaller countries so that they can make an easier transition. A relaxed, differentiated deadline can be given to different countries so that they can transition away from plastics without hurting their economies. So that is what we learned from this important editorial. Now let's look at the next column from page number 7 that deals with the topic of inheritance tax. I'm sure many of you would have heard about the term recently. Inheritance tax has been trending on social media ever since the Indian election season began. There have been a lot of accusations by different parties and leaders that some parties are interested in bringing an inheritance tax, but few parties have denied making such claims. In reality, if you look at the actual facts, the idea was revived by one of India's well-known entrepreneurs and NRIs, Sam Pitroda, right? And inheritance tax is not something which is entirely new in the Indian context as well. Globally, there are examples, there are precedents about inheritance tax. Even in India, there is a precedence of inheritance tax being implemented. So what is inheritance tax? Why is it necessary? What's the criticism against it? That's what we can understand through this article. The writers are saying that in India, there is massive inequality. The divide between the rich and the poor has widened significantly, leading to concentration of wealth within the hands of the top 1% of the population. Now, this is not just a guess or an estimate. There have been studies by various institutions and organizations which have highlighted the growing income divide in the country. The increasing divide between the rich and the poor is a matter of concern. See, India has done well to lift millions of people out of poverty. Tackling poverty is one aspect of governance, but at the same time, addressing inequalities between the rich and the poor should also be a priority in governance. In the last 3 decades especially, India has done phenomenally well when it comes to tackling poverty. Through various social welfare programs and through redistribution of resources, the government has been able to uplift millions of people from poverty. But however, if you look at the divide, the wealth and income divide between the top 1%, the elite 1%, and the rest 99%, there is a massive divide that exists. Recently, Oxfam brought out a report that richest 1% in India own more than 40% of the total wealth in the country. So this makes India one of the most unequal countries. There were other studies as well. The inequality report on India recently pointed out that the top 1% and the top 10%, they have cornered most of the wealth and resources, almost establishing a monopolistic control on resources in the country, leaving behind very little for majority of the population. Now, such social divide, income divide, is unsustainable in a democratic state, because this will influence how power is exercised, how democratic rights can be exercised. If the rich almost have a monopoly on wealth, if they have a monopoly on the resources, and if this is perpetuated down generations, throughout intergenerations, this will only increase the divide even decades later and a century later, right? And it keeps pushing the middle class and the lower classes down by denying them equal opportunities, by denying them an equal voice. So there are serious political, social, and economic implications that arise out of such a stark income and social divide in the country. So writers are strongly supporting the implementation of an inheritance tax. Essentially, they are calling for taxing the wealth, the assets created by the elites, the ultra-rich, the wealth which eventually gets passed down the generations to their descendants. Now, the argument of those who favor inheritance tax is that the descendants who are going to inherit massive amounts of wealth and property and assets, they never worked for these assets. They did not put in any effort. They didn't earn these assets. It was their parents, their grandparents who had earned this. So they don't deserve the entire wealth. That is the argument. Now, this might seem a little shocking to some of you, but it is a very accepted norm to tax the inheritance so that part of the inherited wealth, part of that value can be diverted towards government revenue, towards government resources, so that there is redistribution of wealth and we can prevent concentration of wealth and resources. Look at the Indian Constitution. Under directive principles of state policy, the state is mandated to prevent concentration of wealth and ensure that there is distribution of resources. As I told you, there are examples, there are precedents in India and around the world of imposing an inheritance tax. So the writers say that there might be a lot of criticism, but inheritance tax has a valid basis because those who are inheriting wealth in these ultra-rich families, they're only perpetuating dynastic control, monopolistic control of the families on Indian economy, on Indian resources. So one way to prevent this, one way to address this divide is by levying an inheritance tax so that the assets which are being passed down generations, part of it can be taxed to increase government revenue, which in turn can be used by the government to finance social welfare programs, to redistribute that wealth towards the weaker classes so that the income divide can be bridged, the social wealth divide can be bridged. Now, of course, there is a big criticism as well against it. There is a strong criticism. The criticism is that what's the guarantee that the tax which has been collected, which can be very substantial, what's the guarantee that it will reach the poor people? Given that government systems in India can be corrupt, given that there can be leakage of funds, given that the political class and even a part of the official bureaucratic class can be corrupt, what if they themselves eat that money, and what if the money never reaches, or the wealth or the resources, if they never reach the weaker sections? Then it defeats the whole purpose of levying an inheritance tax. So that's a very valid argument, right? So that is why even before you can think of implementing an inheritance tax, you need to improve your governance. There should be good governance. There should be adequate measures against corruption. There should be enhanced vigilance to prevent such corrupt practices. And there should be very well designed socio-economic welfare programs which have to be properly implemented. So you need a strong grassroots bureaucratic government machinery which can religiously implement such welfare schemes which could be funded through inheritance revenue raised through an inheritance tax. So talking about the examples around the world, for example, in the US, a few decades ago, there was an inheritance tax. Recently, Joe Biden has proposed bringing back inheritance tax in the US. In Japan, there is an inheritance tax even today, which is up to 55%. So if, let's say, you're inheriting your parents or your family's wealth and assets, 55% of it goes to the government as an inheritance tax. This in turn is channeled towards welfare of the people. So that accounts for redistribution of wealth and resources. In India also, we had something called estates duty from 1953 to 1985. During those 3 decades, we had something called estates duty, which was a type of an inheritance tax. And according to studies, the estates duty in India, which was levied from 1953 to 1985, it helped in reducing the control of the elite and the rich on India's resources. It helped in reducing inequalities, according to a peer-reviewed study. So there are empirical evidences to show that inheritance tax can actually help address inequalities. It can actually serve a socio-economic purpose and redistribute the wealth and resources. Because the fundamental argument here is that the descendants who are inheriting the wealth and assets of their family, right, they don't entirely deserve that. Because they didn't work for it, as simple as that. And also, given the fact that top 1% maintains almost dynastic monopolistic control on wealth and assets and resources, it's only justified to redistribute the wealth. That's what the writers are pointing out. But as I said, the criticism is also equally valid. One, is it really justified to levy such inheritance tax? Next, what's the guarantee that the revenue raised by the government will be actually channeled towards welfare programs? What's the guarantee that the money will not be eaten away by corrupt officials and politicians? What if it never reaches the poor people? What if it does not lead to improvement in socio-economic indicators? Right? So those criticisms are definitely valid as well. So it's important to look at both sides of the argument. The article in that way is a little one-sided. The writers are completely favoring inheritance tax, but I'm just trying to provide the other side of the story as well to understand why inheritance tax could be risky. It could even hurt innovation. It could hurt the motivation as well for certain entrepreneurs and wealthy families to continue striving towards the development of their business. Right? If it's known that large part of their wealth will be taken away by the government instead of passing it down to their descendants, right? It might act as a disincentive, right? So these issues need to be addressed. The criticism is very valid that what's the guarantee that the revenue raised will be used for welfare programs? What's the guarantee that it will actually lead to reduction in inequality and help the weaker sections, right? So without addressing these basic concerns, inheritance tax might be unviable in the current context. But definitely, theoretically, inheritance tax has a valid basis. There is a justifiable ground for levying an inheritance tax. So it's a debatable issue. Of course, it's something that's left to the government, the parliament to decide. But being aware of both sides of the argument will help you tackle any question that might come on this topic. Now let's look at the next column from page number 8 that's related to international relations. The article is dealing with the UK-Rwanda deal regarding asylum seekers. I hope you know that United Kingdom receives a large number of illegal migrants, refugees, right? And many of them seek asylum, political asylum in the UK. For example, from war-torn countries like Syria, Iraq, etc. Also from many poor North African countries and other African nations hit by civil war. Even from a few South Asian countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc. From all these countries, there is a huge inflow of illegal migrants, refugees towards United Kingdom. The UK has been dealing with this refugee burden from a long time. In fact, many European countries, many West European countries, they have been consistently dealing with the problem of refugees and asylum seekers. So one problem that UK faces is that a lot of asylum seekers, they reach France and other West European nations, and they try to make a risky journey through the sea route. They try to cross the English Channel from France to England, and they try to reach United Kingdom and seek asylum in the country. For any nation beyond a certain level, constant flow of refugees, illegal migrants does become a burden, right? It will have social and economic consequences. It not only creates an economic burden on the state, because on the grounds of human rights, the state will be obligated to provide them a basic living, provide them shelter, food, etc., and also ensure their overall well-being. Plus, some illegal migrants or asylum seekers might break the law, or they might be pushed to break the law out of desperation, right? Which could create security problems and social situations as well. So there are many concerns associated with huge refugee inflow and the problem of illegal migration. And that's something UK has been dealing with from a long time. So now UK has come out with a very controversial plan to transfer this burden to a faraway African country called Rwanda. Rwanda is an African country in East Africa, and the UK government has signed a deal with Rwanda to accommodate some of these asylum seekers. In fact, this deal was brought out a few years ago, and it was even struck down by the Supreme Court of UK as unconstitutional. But later, UK Parliament has made few changes to the deal to bypass the Supreme Court judgment, and now they have operationalized the agreement. The first asylum seeker was transferred to Rwanda, and essentially Rwanda will rehabilitate these asylum seekers. Now you might ask, why is Rwanda doing this? Why is Rwanda accepting this burden? Right? What does Rwanda gain from this? Rwanda says that this is purely on humanitarian grounds. Both UK and Rwanda are justifying the deal, stating that this is being done only on humanitarian grounds. But however, as part of the deal, there is a financial incentive for Rwanda to accept these asylum seekers. The UK will be providing millions of pounds in funding to support Rwanda's integration program. So these asylum seekers who are detained in the UK, they will have a choice. Either they can go back to another country, a third country. They can go back to their home country as well if they wish to, or opt for another third country, or accept the deal that UK has with Rwanda and agree to be shifted to Rwanda. So they'll be put on a plane to be sent to Rwanda, and here the government of Rwanda will accommodate them in refugee camps that has come up around the country. So here human rights activists and several human rights organizations like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, they've all raised a lot of concerns, very serious concerns. Because see, Rwanda is not a country which is known for upholding human rights. It has been known for authoritarian regimes, committing a genocide. Even now, it is backing rebel groups in neighboring country, Democratic Republic of Congo. In DRC, there's a civil war going on, and Rwanda is partly sponsoring some of the rebel groups in DRC. Rwanda is known for curbing fundamental rights and democratic rights. It has stifled right to free speech and expression. It has used authoritarian force to target any dissidents, any opponents, or anyone who speaks against the authoritarian regime in the country. Right? So there is a serious concern here. If refugees, asylum seekers are deported by UK as part of the deal, and if they are sent to Rwanda, right, Rwanda gets a financial incentive for accepting them. So there is a clear financial motive involved because the money is huge. It amounts to millions of pounds. And the other concern is how will Rwanda treat these asylum seekers who are being settled, rehabilitated in this African country. Rwanda itself is a struggling economy. It's a least developed country, all right, but of late its economy has seen some progress in the recent years, but it is still categorized as a LDC, as a least developed country. Plus, it is not known for respecting democratic rights and democratic norms. It's known for authoritarian policies and tendencies. So there is every possibility that these asylum seekers can be mistreated. There can be violation of their rights. So that is a concern flagged by human rights activists. But the government of UK and Rwanda continue to defend the program by stating that this is being done by keeping in mind the best interests of the asylum seekers. Because as part of the deal, the asylum seekers also get an incentive. If they choose to go to Rwanda, they get an incentive. They will get some funds which will be provided by the UK government so that they can set up a new life. They will get support in vocational training, in acquiring a job, right, in establishing a livelihood for themselves, in establishing a place where they can live eventually. So such support is extended by UK for the asylum seekers as well if they wish to move to Rwanda as part of the deal. So there are incentives to both the government of Rwanda and the asylum seekers. So UK says that it's a well thought out plan, it's a humane plan that provides for integration of these refugees and asylum seekers and allows them to re-establish their lives in a new country, in a third country. But the concern here is there a financial motive which is driving Rwanda just to get the funds from UK? And later, what if Rwanda mistreats the asylum seekers? What if it violates the human rights of these refugees? So that remains a standing concern. So that is what we understand from this column. And now we move on to the prelims section. We have 3 small articles. Let's take a quick look at the prelims related topics. On page number 5, we have an article referring to the breakout of a deadly disease in Kerala. The West Nile fever has broken out in a few districts in Kerala. In the districts of Kozhikode, Thrissur and Malappuram, several cases of West Nile fever has been reported, and unfortunately one person has passed away. A man has died, an old-aged man has died because of West Nile fever. It can be a fatal disease. So let's understand all the important facts about West Nile fever. The first point you need to note down is that it is a viral disease caused by a virus called the West Nile virus. It was discovered in Africa, in Uganda, right? And first cases were reported not just in Africa, but it later spread to North America, Europe, and Asia, and other parts of the world. Now, this disease is primarily mosquito-borne. It is primarily spread to humans through the bite of mosquitoes. There are several host animals which host the West Nile virus. For example, certain cats and even birds. They are seen as the hosts of the West Nile virus. So these host animals, when they are bitten by the mosquitoes, they will play a role in transmitting the virus to humans when they bite humans, right? So this is the mode of transmission. There is no recorded case of human-to-human transition, right? As of now, we haven't seen any reported case of human-to-human transmission. It's mainly spread through the bite of a mosquito, right? And it's the West Nile virus which causes West Nile fever. Now, what are the symptoms? The symptoms in many cases are not even shown. That's what is unique about the disease. In 80% of the infected patients, there are no symptoms. They display no symptoms at all. But others can suffer from very serious symptoms, from a fever to rash, to muscle stiffness, neck stiffness, even facing confusion, tremors, and even being pushed into coma or a vegetative state is possible. Because this disease affects your nervous system. It can infiltrate the nervous system, affect the functioning of your nervous neuron cells. And many symptoms are very similar to the cases of encephalitis, Japanese encephalitis, right? So that is one comparison which has been drawn. The symptoms of West Nile fever is little similar to that of Japanese encephalitis. There is an attack on the nervous system which happens in very aggravated cases. But in 80% of the cases, there are no symptoms at all, and it is the Culex species of mosquitoes, the female mosquito, which is responsible for transmitting the virus. Now, as of now, there is no vaccine available. There are no vaccines available for humans, so prevention in that regard is not possible. The only way to contain or prevent is by curbing the spread of mosquitoes, by maintaining cleaner environments, by preventing the clogging of water, right? Using mosquito nets, mosquito repellents. So whatever measures you take for, let's say, malaria or dengue or chikungunya, the same measures apply here to control the spread of the disease through mosquitoes. So there is no vaccine available, and treatment is largely supportive treatment or symptomatic treatment, which addresses the immediate symptoms. The casualty rate is relatively less, but it is possible for these cases to escalate quickly, especially when the nervous system is under attack. It can affect other organs and other functionings as well. Respiratory system could be attacked. It could lead to many other complications causing multi-organ failure. So that is when the disease can become fatal. But although the fatality rate is relatively low, it is indeed a matter of concern, and right now Kerala government is on alert to contain the spread of the disease. So this is what you should know about the West Nile fever. Next, on page 13, we have an article referring to the renewable energy projects in Sri Lanka, which is being executed by an Indian company. In the northern province of Sri Lanka, India recently won a deal to develop wind farms, offshore wind farms, and also to develop solar projects in the northern province of Sri Lanka, in the Jaffna region of Sri Lanka. Now, this contract has been awarded to an Indian company, which is Adani Green. Adani Green Energy Limited has won the contract. So what's interesting here is that some of these renewable energy projects that Sri Lanka was planning, initially it was awarded to Chinese companies. When Gotabaya Rajapaksa was the president and Mahinda Rajapaksa was the prime minister a few years ago, these renewable energy projects in the northern part of Sri Lanka, very close to India's coastline, they were awarded to Chinese companies. But following Sri Lanka's economic crisis and after Rajapaksa family was removed from power, and after India gave $4 billion worth of assistance to Sri Lanka to overcome the economic crisis, Sri Lanka handed over these projects back to India. Right? It cancelled the deal with the Chinese companies and it has awarded the contract to India's Adani Group. So according to the article, Sri Lanka has agreed on the price, on the tariffs at which it's going to purchase the electricity from this company. So these are renewable energy projects, clean energy projects, both solar and offshore wind projects, which is coming up in the Mannar region, over here, in the Gulf of Mannar region, and also in the Pooneryn region. These are places located in the Jaffna region in the northern province of Sri Lanka. You also have small islands called the Delft Island. Near the Jaffna Peninsula, between India and Sri Lanka, there are these small islands called Delft Islands. So around these areas, these offshore wind mills will be set up by Adani Group, and few solar parks are also being considered in the northern province. So as far as the offshore wind projects are concerned, Sri Lanka has agreed upon the rates at which it's going to purchase the electricity. That is the development reported here. But just know that an Indian company has won a key energy project in Sri Lanka, right? India was very worried when China won some of these projects because Chinese companies working in such a sensitive area near Park Bay and Gulf of Mannar, near the coastline of Tamil Nadu, was seen as a strategic threat. So now that Indian companies are executing some of the projects, it's a matter of relief for India. It also establishes India's presence and influence in the region. Now coming to the last article on page number 14, the article refers to a very important international institution called IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. According to the article, the Director General of IAEA has urged Iran to cooperate when it comes to inspection of its nuclear plants to ensure that Iran is not developing an illegal nuclear weapon. In fact, Iran is already part of a nuclear deal, which includes European countries. US had quit this nuclear deal. So under the nuclear deal, IAEA inspectors were given access to Iran's nuclear facilities to constantly check and inspect the nuclear program of Iran to ensure that Iran is not developing an illicit nuclear weapon program. So here the chief of IAEA has urged Iran to be more transparent and to cooperate with the international organization so that the basic safeguards can be enforced on Iran. Now the topic of IAEA can be very important for the exam. So let's quickly understand the basic facts related to International Atomic Energy Agency. This organization was established in 1957 through its own statute, the IAEA statute, and it is headquartered in Vienna, Austria. All right? It is called Atoms for Peace. It's also called Atoms for Peace. The primary focus of IAEA is to promote the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. Is that clear? Its primary focus is to promote the peaceful uses of nuclear energy and nuclear technology. So its mandate is to ensure the safety of nuclear plants, the security of nuclear programs, and ensure that nuclear technology is used only for peaceful purposes. So as part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, the IAEA is also responsible for implementing the non-proliferation provisions. that is to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons technology. So this is the mandate of IAEA. It is responsible for preventing the proliferation of nuclear weapons technology as per the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It is responsible for implementing a set of safeguards to ensure that nuclear weapons technology doesn't spread and leak to other countries. It is responsible for recommending safety standards, security measures to secure the nuclear program, to prevent accidents and disasters, and to make nuclear plants resilient to withstand the impact of disasters. It is also responsible for helping other countries to utilize nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, that is, for medical purposes or generating electricity, etc. So this is an autonomous, independent organization, but however, it does work with the UN system. So it's not part of the UN. It's not directly part of the United Nations. Please understand this. It's an independent, autonomous international organization. Is that clear? But however, it works closely with the UN system. It's not integral to the UN system, but works with the UN system. It reports to UN General Assembly and UN Security Council. If any country is breaching the safety security standards, if any country is involved in proliferating nuclear weapons technology, those reports are submitted by IAEA to UN General Assembly and UN Security Council, and they can take action accordingly. Is that clear? So IAEA also acts as a global inspector. It has the right to review and inspect. So IAEA inspectors can be sent to countries where nuclear programs exist to inspect the nuclear facilities and validate whether they are following the safety security measures and whether they are committed to the goal of non-proliferation. So India became a member of IAEA in 1957 itself. There are more than 170 members. India is a member. India even opened up its civilian nuclear reactors recently for IAEA inspection after we signed the nuclear deal with US in 2005. We separated our military program and civilian program, and the civilian nuclear facilities in India are open for IAEA inspection. So these are some basic details about this important international organization. So this completes my detailed discussion of today's The Hindu. Please take a look at the 2 practice questions. Note down the questions and try to write an answer based on what we have discussed today. And if possible, please post your answers in the comment section. I will go through them and it will also help other aspirants as well. So I hope you've learned something today, and I hope you found the session to be interesting. If you did, please let me know in the comments, press the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So that is it for now. Let's meet tomorrow at 10 a.m. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.